Welcome to Monfre and Tell the Truth, where we shine the light into the myth, murk, and mystery of sales and marketing and help lead you to the sweet, sweet promised land of KPIs. I'm Pete Monfre, your fractional chief marketing officer at large, and this is my marketing truther co-host, Jason Myers. Jason is the chief revenue officer of the Austin Lawrence Group, sales expert, author, and content marketer with whom I don't always agree. But when I do, you can bet he's telling the truth. How you doing, man?
Doing well.
Did I read that good? My good reader?
Yes, yes, you did.
I felt I read it well. I'll read anything you put in front of me, really. So just FYI to everybody out there. You got a bee in your bonnet today.
That's right.
What is it?
We're talking about the bad practices I see daily on LinkedIn for sales prospecting.
Yes.
And how to make it right.
And how to make it right. Good. Because we need the positive part.
That's
but
right.
The negative part is so large. I did a little bit of research right before this episode, and I didn't realize there were so many wrong ways to use it, but let's go.
What were you finding in your research? Let's see what you came up with.
Well, a lot of it was contradictory also. So how you handle, it's all about following posts and making comments and being participatory, putting your title, and I wonder what you think of this, putting your title up in the main headline under your name or a description of your value proposition. I kind of prefer value prop, but contradictory and too many things to list.
So I think all of those things are good. There's good and bad ways to do all of those things. For the most part, I agree with the value proposition probably in the headline, especially if you're a salesperson, right? Like it's different if you're looking for a job.
Right. Well, that's true. That's a huge distinction because it started as a recruiting tool. A lot of people still use it or see it only as a recruiting tool, and then a lot of people see it as a prospecting tool, right?
That's right.
So what is it?
It's actually a pretty horrible prospecting tool, if you ask me.
There's one big mistake. You're using it as a prospecting tool.
So I say that with a caveat because people are going to get mad at me when I say that, right?
I hope
so. So what is it good for, right? Like in terms of sales prospecting. So it's really good for researching targets within an account and finding reasons to reach out to people to try to get into a conversation. So if you're doing that, that's a right way to use it. The most right way, I think, to use it is when you're looking at target accounts is to try to see who you're connected to that could get you an introduction within those accounts. So if you work at a large company, for example, you should be connecting with everyone in your company on LinkedIn with and tell them that, my purpose is to get in front of targets, and I'm convinced that everyone that we need to be connected to in my territory is probably connected to somebody in this company on LinkedIn.
Right.
And so if you build your connections that way, where you're talking about who can make me a warm referral outside of LinkedIn, and that's a distinction too, because which kind of is problem number two. Like if you're sales prospecting at a high level, I wouldn't expect your targets to be on LinkedIn as much as you are as a sales prospector, right? They're not trolling through these articles every day looking for information. They just don't have time to do it. It's not of high value to them. So like if you're using that as your primary outreach to try to get somebody's attention, I think you're going to fall pretty flat.
Well, it depends on who you're selling to, though. So we're talking really about if you're selling to the top, they're probably not going to be on there.
Right.
Well, they're going to be on there, but they're not going to be participatory.
Not to the level that you are as a sales prospector.
Well, does it also kind of like show your cards a little bit that you got nothing else to do but sit on LinkedIn?
It absolutely does, especially if you are putting stupid comments that people don't care about. to try to
Well,
get attention that are purely self-serving.
well, and granted, people will use social automation, and I can usually spot the automated ones, and I can also spot the ones that were, and I'm guilty of it. You know, you're
Right.
just
Well, I am too.
you're like all of a sudden you're like typing something, hit enter, and then go about your day, and then about 6 hours later you look and you're like, holy shit. Uh, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about using it, and I think this is a common one that people already know. It's the sales pitch right out of the gate. Like if the first words out of your mouth is, this is what I'm selling. And I'm talking about like personal messages. I was just going to read one, but I closed it off my screen. But I don't think I have to read one because we all know what it is.
We all get
Hi.
'em.
Hey,
It's
Pete, you know what? I'm selling this and this. Want to do something? And they actually don't have a call to action a lot of times. I was just going to put one on there as an imaginary example, but usually not. I mean, so I think that's an obvious one. But there's a deeper thing that you were going to bring up.
So I think what the most annoying thing, and everyone can identify this, is that somebody reaches out with a connection request, you accept it, and then they turn around and give you the sales pitch right up front.
Oh, so let's see. So they approach you like a prospect,
Mhm.
and then they flip it around on you. They flip the tables on you, and they try to
Well,
sell you something. That
exactly. Which,
that's what I
which for
thought.
me, I've been deleting those people uh, as soon as I connect with them. They hit me with the sales pitch. I go back and unconnect with them.
I have to tell this little short story, and I won't use names, but I had a company contact me from outside of the United States, and it was through LinkedIn, and they, it in the you want to give everybody a chance to initially qualify them, in a first conversation. So I get around to asking about, what's their position with the company, and they're a little bit sketchy, and they'll get a little uncomfortable, a little stuttery, and they're interns. And they were really calling to sort of ask me questions and get a bunch of free consulting. And I thought it was sort of cute, like in a hamster kind of way. They're just starting out. But I didn't participate for very long. But LinkedIn, that's where it came from. So you really put yourself out there, and I use it to promote events that my company does, and we're involved in the performing arts here, and I think it's great to use it to build authority. I think those are
Absolutely.
pretty good uses for it. Where
So let's talk about that too, because that
content
is a
marketing authority. How would you? Well, let me start with this. How would you define market authority? I think it's a good place to start.
so for personal branding or positioning yourself as an expert that can transcend the job that you're currently in, I think it's excellent,
Ah,
right?
oh, see, that's interesting.
Because you want, even as a salesperson, if you've read the Challenger Sale or some of those other sales books, it talks about, being able to really kind of get the prospect to question their status quo. That's really what we want to do when we're reaching out cold, right? We've got to get them off the status quo. That's the biggest competitor when you're reaching out to somebody. So with your content, you should be, not necessarily provocative, but you should get the reader to kind of question what they're doing, which might lead to a conversation down the road. But it shows
Yeah, yeah,
expertise.
absolutely. I mean, and that's classic thought leader. It is a huge audience, and I had some stats. Jason, I'm a little unprepared today. I had some stats on my iPad, and there is a redonkulous amount of people on LinkedIn, and so I mean, it's definitely a viable market. It's also, how I think about it is this: it's a big relational database. Now, maybe this is like too literal, but it literally is a big relational database, right?
Yeah, right.
So you mentioned research. That'd be a good thing to use a relational database for. It's a network of people which seems very obvious, but I think when you're in the throes of using LinkedIn, that obviousness goes out the window. You get very involved in the KPIs and the social engineering around it, but really it's a network of people. So how would you interact with those people? In my case, I like to try to bring people value right at the beginning. First contact. Here's something for
Yeah.
you. Nothing in it for me. Hope it helps you. Great, because statistically a certain number of people will need help or will refer me. But it's about bringing that value first. And if you look at that through LinkedIn, oh, it's awesome. You have a lot of tools to be able to do that. And there's an expectation that you're there to do business, which is great. Now, what about this? What about posting Facebook-esque content on LinkedIn?
So if you're talking about the inspirational quotes and things
Yeah,
like that,
yeah.
personally, that annoys me.
The conspicuous selfie in a bikini down at SeaWorld.
Uh, Maybe that's a trend. Uh,
I
Personally, I think it's an unfortunate
only
trend.
saw it once.
I'm seeing more of that kind of content on LinkedIn that really, you see more on Facebook, the inspirational quotes, the things like that. And it's like,
Well,
I don't need it
I,
here. It just gets in the way of what I'm trying to do.
Well, I see things that are political in nature, and it's like I understand that people want to, communicate and have every right to put their opinion out there, but it doesn't do your brand any good. Like if I was advising a client, I'd be like, stay out of the hornet's nest. I mean, that's all I'm saying there. But I've been doing some experimenting lately with different kinds of visuals and different ways of writing and looking at different posts on my own account. And I found a trend I think is really interesting I wanted to share with you. If you look at your feed, for example, let's say you want to get notoriety, right? You want to raise your profile, your market authority, and notoriety equals authority, by the way. It could be from a poster at the post office, or it could be that you're an expert in your field. But either way, it works the same, right? So let's say you're working that organic feed, and I started noticing that pictures that were very stark and didn't have any type and had bright colors generally would start to get 2,000, 3,000 views. At one point, I was looking at how many views per hour, and one of them was going about 65 views an hour, which is pretty
Interesting.
good. And it was getting, I'm trying to remember some of the statistics, but um, I think also my exposure keeps changing. I'm going to keep turning it back up. It's getting dark in here. Like the more I talk, the darker it gets. Is your world like that? Um, but those posts remarkably did well, and then if you look at your your feed, you'll start to notice there's a real sameness that's going on there visually, and it really starts to blend together. And I think our minds just skip over it, our eyes skip over it, right? It looks like a sea of complexity, and then you see this very stark image. I used one of a pair of my dad's cowboy boots. I think
Nice.
that thing is still going on strong. I mean, it's like weeks now. But so I just think that's interesting. So how can you raise that authority? And then also doing webinars. So like, I believe that if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and you're bringing them a piece of knowledge, that you're doing something, a legitimate, let's say, webinar or Zoominar, as I like to call them. Um, there's value in that. They may or may not see it at first, but I think that's an acceptable way to reach out to people. What do you think? Does that seem like
I,
you're selling some?
no, I would agree. I think that considering that LinkedIn is a good content distribution platform, and that's kind of what you're talking about. So we create the content, a webinar,
Yeah, usually it's
blog post, or
valuable
whatever,
content. Right,
and
valuable content here, want you to be, in my case, I like to help people make better decisions when it comes to marketing. The more knowledge you have, the better decisions you're going to make. Might not even be me. You might not want me. That's fine.
yeah. So
But
I think all those things are true. I think as a salesperson, if you're using it for prospecting, there's a lot of rabbit holes that you can get uh, that you can go down on LinkedIn. A good example is like commenting on a lot of posts and things like that. I'm not saying don't do it. You definitely should do it. But it's got to be thoughtful. There's got to be a reason for you to comment on it. So when somebody posts something like, well, congratulations to our team for XYZ, there's really nothing to comment on there,
Well,
right?
the truth is, that's about you. Okay,
Right.
this is a show about truth, right? So let's tell a truth. Here's a big truth for you folks. Nobody gives a shit about you.
That
Sorry.
is
I mean, I
correct.
know it's like when I found out Santa wasn't real, right? I think we just gave them a moment out there. They're like, oh no, nobody cares about you. All right?
Well, and I think we know
They
that we've had that pounded into our heads for a long time, but
have
people
we?
are still doing it. Well, it has for me.
Well, I don't know. But here's the thing though. They do care about something. And what do they care about? They care about themselves. All right? So they
Mhm.
care about what's going on with them, sometimes in a visceral way, right? Like in an emotional visceral way. If you know your customer so well that you can predict that visceral reaction to whatever it is you're talking about, that's something that the human mind will let in, right? Because we spend most of our time like blocking shit out as a survival mechanism because we're bombarded, right? And
Mhm.
social media, I mean, a LinkedIn feed is a great example of just sensory overload. Is my focus doing
And
weird things? Let me do something here. Let's try that. But that sensory overload, we evolved to have to screen some of that out because it literally would be overwhelming.
well, right. And yes,
And
totally
so
agree
you
with
got to
that.
break through that. And the way to do that is, I guess the word would be being relevant, and even going back to like Maslow's theory, of need. What is it? The need hierarchy.
Mhm.
It really is that. And sometimes, let's say you're selling disinfectants or something, it's hard to kind of connect that. But I just have this firm belief, and I wonder if you agree or disagree, that people buy to solve a problem. I don't know if companies spend money on anything but to solve problems.
That's right. They do.
Well, what if
I
somebody
mean,
said, well, we're spending money to invest in the future?
well, that's a problem.
That's a problem, right? Exactly. You don't like the present. Yes, exactly.
The problem is you want a better future, right?
It's the
So,
yacht sales, right? Like, imagine yourself on this yacht. Just can you see it in your mind? No, the real problem there is the guy feels like a weenie down at the marina and he needs a bigger yacht. There's
again,
actually a big
back
problem.
to the status quo is unacceptable.
Right,
That's how you move people forward.
right. And that's what becomes relevant to you. So I guess the moral of the story is, you got to be, if you're going to use the organic posts, you need to know your customer and be relevant. And I think you and I do a lot of this in our jobs, and it's hard. I have to admit, you know,
it,
um,
it's really hard
it
because it's
takes
time
effort.
consuming,
It
right?
takes effort.
The reality is of any kind of outreach, whether it's on LinkedIn or emails or calls or whatever, if it's not super relevant, it's just not going to, they're not going to pay attention to it. And you run the risk of, you know, pissing them off.
So not being relevant,
It's like,
also not putting any
if you,
thought and work into it.
right,
Like, we're
if
like
you
just,
call me
oh,
up if you call me up and make an assumption that you could have spent 2 minutes on my website and found out that I wasn't a prospect, that pisses me off. Right.
yes. Well,
I
sometimes
mean,
sometimes prospects do that. They get on the phone and they haven't even looked at your website. They're like, "What's your name again?" What?
yes, that's all
Why am I here?
right. One more important point that I want to make in terms of sales prospecting that I think is interesting. So I think several years ago, it was better to send an in mail, right? As a for a first contact, because it was a lot fewer people were doing that, and you could ensure that it got to the inbox because it was tied to their email, and so sometimes, and there wasn't a lot of frequency of that.
Hmm.
I think anymore, if you're sending in mails, especially as a first contact, it's become socially acceptable to ghost you.
To just ignore them.
Yeah, just ignore. because it's just not important.
Maybe I do that.
I do. I definitely do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're right. I mean, it's kind of like fake email. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah.
Um,
So the question becomes like, when is the right time to do the connection requests? And for me, like, I usually reserve the connection for some kind of interaction. So uh, they're an inbound lead, for example.
they've
I
done
might connect with
something
them
to.
on LinkedIn as a third touch. I don't even do it as the first touch. Well, I say that sometimes I do it as a first touch if I think it makes sense.
Right.
When an inbound lead comes in, I research them, I try to figure out, what they're interested in, but more importantly, what's the next piece of content that I can give them that's going to help them solve their problem?
Right.
Because
Because
that's what's going to
hopefully,
get me into a conversation.
hopefully they're talking about their problems on LinkedIn.
Right.
And then you can also see other people in the organization, especially if you're doing account-based sales, that kind of thing. Great tool set, right? But I
Right.
think I think those things are stinking it up for sure. And
But
so
you can
it's a
you can go
question of
down a
using it
lot of
for its
rabbit
purpose.
holes. You can go down a lot of rabbit holes by you know looking for all these contacts and commenting on their posts, and I'm not sure how helpful it is really. Uh,
Everything but picking up the phone,
right.
right? So you're just like doing
I
this
mean,
because
the
maybe
other side
they'll.
of that is a lot of times we can't get the phone numbers anymore. So if it's a high value target, you've got to think of multiple creative ways to try to get their attention.
Right.
LinkedIn can be one of those. I just don't think
Well,
it's the first one of those.
absolutely. And I think in future programs we'll start getting to talk about integrated marketing. That's really what it is. I mean, it has a lot of different names nowadays, but back in the old days, we called it integrated marketing, and it's really the phenomenon of reaching people in different media in different contexts, and they start seeing you over and over in all these different places, and to them that equals notoriety, which equals authority, which equals expertise and quality. The more they've heard of you, the better you must be.
Well,
Now,
that's one of
that's
the
not
only
real, that's
ways.
perception, right?
That's one of the only ways as a salesperson that you can increase your social value. Because remember, as a salesperson, you're lowest on the totem pole and nobody wants to talk to
Nobody wants to talk to you, yes. And no one cares about you, and Santa's not real. Hey, so join us next week. You're measuring it wrong. We're going to talk about how we measure the things that are easy to measure instead of measuring the right things. It's going to be about KPIs because we're going to take you to that sweet promised land. We'll see you next week.